This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Kulo.
I'm David McDonald.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
This week on the show, we don't have a guest. We had a last-minute cancellation, but that's okay because there were some really good discussion columns this week that we found, including one that seems like it's going to run for a couple of weeks now that is by a guy that we've had on the show before, Andy Lee. You might remember Andy Lee is the great pianist that has specialized recently in playing a lot of minimalist repertoire, particularly kind of the early proto-minimalist repertoire. We had him on to talk about his recording of November when that came out earlier this year. That amazing 5-hour piece that kind of kicked off minimalism in music in a lot of ways. And he has an interesting piece this week in New Music Box that kind of criticizes an idea that we spend a lot of time talking about on this show, and that is the idea of the artist as an entrepreneur. And his thesis is, in the title, "You're an artist, not an entrepreneur." He wasn't drunk when he wrote it, I assume, even though I just made it sound like that when I said his title.
Or 85.
Or 85, right. He's a very young, sober man. But his thesis seems to be that all this talk about entrepreneurism is deluding us as artists and distracting us from the thing that we are really supposed to be doing, which is making great art. What do you guys think about that idea? Sam, I know you have some strong thoughts.
Well, I don't know. To me, it's like finding something to complain about in the state of the state of affairs as they are now. It's looking for something to complain about. From one of the people.
What do you mean?
Like saying that you're an artist, not an entrepreneur. I don't know what. Okay, I understand what he's getting at, but why is he getting at it? Like, what does he hope might be the reaction to this piece by people that would be the benefit? Like, if people took his advice, what would be the benefit at the end?
Don't worry about money. Don't worry about it.
Just keep practicing.
Someone else's problem. That's my manager's problem.
What? I don't think he's saying that.
No, I don't think so either.
Well, then what's the deal then, Patrick?
I think he's probably maybe a little upset. Not upset, but just is perplexed that maybe people are having to feel like they need to go out of their way and create like the next best thing every single time they create something, and that has to drive their machine as their career. I mean, I think we all are entrepreneurs. I mean, like I know, and I think a lot of our most favorite and well-respected musicians, composers today are entrepreneurs. Some of them are very business savvy. Even the old masters were business savvy.
Well, look at Steve Reich and Philip Glass. I mean, if you talk contemporary American composers, those names are definitely going to come up. And they invented a genre of music that they then started pumping content into. Mm-hmm. That seems like a pretty entrepreneurial endeavor to me. Like, invent a product and then invent the demand for the product and then continue making the product.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the focus of a lot of his piece is Claire Chase, who is another person that we've had on the show before and does a lot of really interesting stuff. Actually, no, we haven't had Claire Chase on.
We've had other ice people on.
We've had other of her cadre on the show before, but she has gotten a lot of attention lately for some of her entrepreneurial projects, including ICE, the International Contemporary Ensemble that we've talked about before on the show.
She's gotten recognition to the tune of $500,000.
Sure, she was given a MacArthur grant, a so-called Genius grant, just this year, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's certainly something worth noting. But when you talk to people like that, I feel like this is there's a difference between the kind of startup entrepreneur that we think of in Silicon Valley, where these guys are just doing this thing. Like, they quit their job and they do this thing. They had this stable job somewhere and they quit, and now they're entrepreneurs. And we talk about that a little bit when we're talking about entrepreneurism in music, but that's not the main thing I feel like we're talking about. Most of the people that are doing this, first of all, are not the kind of people that have a kind of regular paycheck job to begin with. They're classical musicians, they're contract workers, they do a gig here, they do a gig there. And second of all, they're not doing these entrepreneurial whatevers as their full-time job in most cases, right? ICE is kind of huge and kind of blown up, and there might be some people that are doing that as their main job, but I don't think it started that way. And I feel like most of these new music ensembles don't start that way, and these people still... They take wedding gigs, they play in chamber orchestras, they teach at universities and colleges, they have private studios, they do regular jobs as well that are not related to music. They have day jobs working in the American Orchestra Guild or Boozy and Hawks or something like that. And that's, I think, a different thing, and I'm not sure that that's really a distraction. And I feel like artists have always had to juggle those different responsibilities, as you were pointing out earlier.
Just to point out, I think ICE's like administration is all still member run. Like, I think it's same with Alarm Will Sound. Like, I don't know, the trombonist does the social media or something like that. It's I believe ICE to a certain extent is that, and these other new music ensembles as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it really brings entrepreneurship into the entire group, I think, and not just like one person who started it. It's like a very much a team effort.
Well, it seems like at the very beginning of his piece, he starts with Claire Chase, as Dave points out, and his big beef seems to be he doesn't want himself, and he thinks it's bad for other artists generally to get stamped as an entrepreneur. Although this is the thing I really don't think he makes completely clear. He makes a statement there where he thinks that undermines you as an artist in some way because it labels you as an entrepreneur, placing that in a role that's equally or even more important than you as an artist. But he doesn't really go on to explain how the undermining occurs, other than you get labeled as an entrepreneur. Maybe suggesting that it's bad that we're putting out to the general population that people you value in arts should be the entrepreneur people. But
so, like, basically, these people who are entrepreneurs and musicians, we shouldn't look at them as entrepreneurs because it takes away from how we see them as this pantheon of incredible artists.
Yes, and I think you using the
heroes.
Using the word pantheon, I think, is perfect, because it's the pantheon mentality, I think, that wants somebody to not be considered. If I get to write music and play gigs and make money, I don't care if you call me a steam shovel operator, you know?
Well, and another thing that I always like to point out when I talk about entrepreneurism in regard to new music is that I like to think of entrepreneurism as, in a more broad sense, as not just starting a business, but starting a project. Like, this is a thing that I am going to make. It does not exist now, and when I am done, it will exist and be a valuable, worthwhile thing in some way, whether that value is something that is easy to assign a dollar amount to, or whether it's just of kind of a wishy-washy cultural value. But to be an entrepreneur is to make a thing that doesn't exist now, and to come up with an idea. And I think it has connotations of leadership and a creative drive toward a goal. And sometimes that goal is to have a business, and sometimes that goal is to have a violin concerto, and sometimes that goal is to put on a show at in a space with your favorite musicians. And sometimes those things result directly in revenue, and sometimes those things just result in making an awesome thing. And one thing that I think that always strikes me is that when we talk about music entrepreneurship, that's what musicians do anyway. Like, we're already coming up with projects and seeing them through. That's writing a piece. That's planning a recital. And sometimes when we talk about music entrepreneurship in schools, we're teaching mostly the business side, but the business side helps to allow for the other parts to work. And I feel like a lot of the emphasis is on that educational step and teaching new young musicians to be entrepreneurs, and that is mostly about helping people not to make the same mistakes all the time. Right? We've always known that there are certain requirements to making it as a string quartet on your own. We just haven't taught them in schools, and we've just let our string quartet players screw it up until they figure it out. And now we said, oh, this is a valuable skill that the people who need the other valuable skills that we're teaching them might also want to have. And we claim to be, promoting people and creating the sorts of people that are going to do this. We should probably help them do the whole thing and not just this one part of it.
Yeah. And to me, it seems like his beef in the article has to do with nomenclature or the label of entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He tries to defend saying...
I wonder if he's thinking that it makes you seem like a schmucky business person, or that you're like selling out to the man.
Yeah, just
Possibly.
doing the hustle.
But I think it's something that's been going on forever. The push is just to say, hey, you better learn this because it's going to be hard enough out there. But he also he quotes Aaron Gervais. Is that how you say the name, Dave?
That's how I've always said it.
Okay.
I don't know how he says it.
He quotes his article about entrepreneurship in the arts quite a bit, and one point that he relies on to try and drive this issue home is saying entrepreneurship is scarcity based, individualistic, inherently objective, and pragmatic by design, and sort of contrasting that with the way art is. But I don't agree with the idea.
I would say that's a contrast between business and art.
Yeah, but I don't think entrepreneurship is necessarily scarcity-based. Entrepreneurship can be scarcity-based if you're move into an area and you're going to start manufacturing, moss-covered three-handled family redundas because nobody in a three-state area manufactures those there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the internet has allowed us to do, and that new kinds of community have allowed, is that starting a business is not as much a zero-sum game as it has been in the past.
Right, but think of Instagram. Instagram started and then in like a year or whatever sold for billions of dollars or whatever it was, but it's certainly not scarcity based. It's creating an environment where people can do something, and there is no shortage of there's no shortage of ways to share pictures. They just discovered a smoother, more user-friendly, streamlined way to make it happen, and people signed on because of that. So it's, to me, saying that entrepreneurship in music is a bad name because it's scarcity based is a straw man. That's not correct.
Well, he does talk about. He also cites Bob Shingleton saying that there's too much classical music, that there's a supply and demand problem, that we're starting all these new music businesses, these new music ensembles, and these new projects, but the statistics tell us that the audience for classical music is diminishing in every measurable way. And I'm not sure that I think that supply can drive demand, though, if you're supplying a different sort of thing, right? And if the supply, maybe the problem maybe the reason there's not enough demand is because the supply sucks, right? We're not talking about a commodity. We're not selling bales of hay or bushels of corn. We're selling a unique thing each time. And maybe the reason that people aren't interested in it is because the thing sucks. And if we made the thing better, we could drive more demand, right? Am I being naive?
No. I mean, that's basically what I was getting at. You go out there and a big part of musical entrepreneurship seems to be figuring out how to create your own demand.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest part of it because you're an artist, you're already creating the product.
Yeah, I mean, I know at least in the popular music world, that's a big attitude where like if you do the same things as all the other bands, but your band sounds better, in theory you'll be a little more successful than the others because you worked harder on the art and it just happens. And
This
I
conversation, this conversation is quickly getting into economic theory.
yeah, right.
And as you know, you all tuned in because we're such brilliant economists.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, so and we should point out that just a few days after Andy's piece in New Music Box, which he says in the piece is the first in a series of 4. So this is something that we may come back to. A couple of days after that was posted, Alex Shapiro, friend of the show,
We all love. We love
who's
her.
wonderful,
Wonderful person.
and is a very entrepreneurial composer living on a tiny island off the west coast of the United States, just being awesome on the internet and writing great stuff, and still is able to have her business, even though she is rather kind of geographically isolated, is very connected to the world through the web. It was a great show. You should check it out. We'll have that link in the show notes, right, Sam?
Yes.
Sam is giving a silent A-OK.
Mm.
So we're going to have that link in the show notes. And one thing that she points out is that it's possible to do all of these things, and one of them doesn't necessarily need to mean that you can't do the other. So Andy's piece is titled, "You're an artist, not an entrepreneur." And Alex's piece is titled, "You're an artist and an entrepreneur." And I think, we do not live in a binary world where there are only artists and entrepreneurs, and you can be either one or the other. Now, the other side of that is that there's certainly a balance that you strike between the time that you spend working on this thing, and at some point that the thing gets big enough that you need to hire somebody that specializes in the business stuff to do those things. And that's how I think most groups get started. Like you were saying, the people in the group do it until they can't do it anymore, or don't want to do it anymore, and then they hire somebody from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to write the next article, and it's going to be titled, "You're an entrepreneur, not an artist."
Ah.
Oh,
We're gonna have
so
all sides.
what do you mean then? Are you just going for completism?
Going for completism.
No, and I'm
And potentially you could say, why say you're an artist? Like, all artists are, like, we don't even need to have the term artist anymore because everyone just wants to create their own thing, wants to make their own living. We should all just call ourselves entrepreneurs.
yeah, making art or other things or whatever.
That's totally true because even like manufacturing and design stuff, you look at like Etsy and like Shapeways and Thingiverse, where you can kind of design a thing and then just put it up there, and then people can have it made to order, and you don't have to have a big thing up front. Or we've got crowdfunding. We've talked way too much about crowdfunding. Did we talk about, by the way, Stephen Malinowski's Nankero Kickstarter?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
You have
Great.
7 days left to back the amazing Kickstarter that Stephen Malinowski is doing on the graphical visual scores, animated scores for the Nankero piano etudes. So you should definitely do that. But that's a great example of a person who is doing this thing on the side that doesn't require a ton of upfront investment and that is different from traditional entrepreneurism. And that's, I think, one way that to compare the kind of plain old dictionary definition of entrepreneur that was written in 1997 or 1897 doesn't make any sense to apply to what we're talking about today when we describe Claire Chase as an arts entrepreneur. And we would never say that Claire Chase is only an entrepreneur. We would always say that she is a fantastic flutist and an entrepreneur, right? And lots of other things. But to say that calling her an entrepreneur means that she's not those other things is, I think, a little facile.
Yes.
I wonder if, are there any other examples of, perhaps, of people out there that we would label as entrepreneurs that maybe got their start or continue to, maybe like we see this in the tech industry a little bit more, but tech isn't necessarily the arts. that we could say like, oh, this operating system that was designed or something. Were they once an artist and now we just talk about them as entrepreneurs because their company became successful?
I mean, I think that happens in tech all the time. You've got kind of the 1 or 3 dude engineering team, and they're always dudes. So sorry for being gender normative, but not a lot of lady startups, which is a problem.
Dudes
but,
and dudettes. It's okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they sell, and then they are just VCs forever, right? This is the Kevin Rose model, right? You create Dig, and then you sell it for a gajillion dollars, and now you just give people Google money. And that's Kevin Rose's job now, is to pick who he should give Google money to. So
some freaking job.
after having founded Dig and also Revision 3,
$60 million.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I bet there's an example of this somewhere, of like a new music ensemble or somebody, or where like somebody got into the administrative side of it so well that they like just decided to hire some other violinist and like, I'll just keep doing this.
Well, so, you know, some of the top administrative positions are now filled by former full-time musicians, like Clive Gillinson, who's the executive director of Carnegie Hall. He was a cellist in the London Symphony Orchestra for like 25 years.
What about
That's awesome. We need more people like that.
friend of the show, Drew McManus?
Precisely.
Yeah.
A recovering tuba player.
We talked to him the very first time he was on our show. We asked him how he got into consulting, and he told us a great story about a tuba audition that had a major mechanical failure that led him into consulting. It's a fun story. And you should not watch that, though, because that was a very early episode of our show, and it would be very embarrassing if you watched that. Sam, don't link that in the show notes.
Yeah. You know, I found an interesting story several weeks ago, and I meant to mention it to you guys, and I forgot, but now it's actually a good time, talking about entrepreneurship and what that does to someone's standing as an artist. The data here is from 2008, but people have just sort of unearthed the data and started talking about it. Probably not everybody's ball of wax, but everybody knows who Aerosmith is, right?
I don't know. Some hipster band or something.
Yeah.
Long-standing, you know, Steven Tyler's like 64 or whatever now and still screams and does front handsprings on stage and what have you.
I think when you have that many chemicals in your system, there's like some preservative nature.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so certainly a successful band, and no matter what you think about them, I would definitely consider them artists. But of course, they're thinking about making money, and if you're talking about lowering your like Andy Lee's piece is sort of like taking the shine off of you as an artist by, you know, besmirching yourself with entrepreneurship. Well,
you think it's that makes it sound. I hate to ascribe that to it because it makes him sound like he's being precious, and I don't think he is.
I think he's being a little bit precious.
Okay.
I think he's nursing a little bit of that artistic entitlement. I can play the hell out of my violin already. What more do you want from me? Kind of idea. A little bit. But so would definitely consider Aerosmith artists, but they also were entrepreneurs to the tune of, in 2008, most of their income by a large margin came from Guitar Hero, not from album sales.
Yeah, I've heard this.
Not from live touring. They licensed, I forgot how many, a bunch of their songs to Activision, and that's what they made huge amount of money on, $25 million in sales for Guitar Hero Aerosmith, because they had their own, you know, all Aerosmith version of the game.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, and frankly, you know, I hate to keep ragging on Andy, but it seems like we all agree with one another and for the most part, and disagree with Andy for the most part, because we do like and respect Andy, and we've read a lot of his interesting writing before. He writes on I Care If You Listen on a pretty regular basis. Like, what are you doing there, Andy? Are you distracting yourself from practicing the piano more? Like, surely that's 5 hours you could have spent performing November to some unsuspecting people on the street.
I hope we're not like drastically taking his thesis statement out of
Yeah,
we're not like completely misunderstanding his.
I was going to
article.
say too. This
'Cause I
might be
feel really
early
bad
as
now.
well. Like,
Yeah, maybe in this, maybe you're saying maybe in the second through fourth articles, he will explain himself in a way that makes us forgive him for this for our interpretation of the first one.
Yeah, actually,
calling it too soon.
I'm really looking forward to seeing the next articles now.
Yeah.
You know what I haven't read is any reaction from Claire.
Yeah, has she said anything?
I've read his piece and I've read Alex's piece, but I'd be curious to see what Claire thinks.
The internet wants to know.
I think we've maybe killed this one dead a couple of times by now. One thing that we've talked about on the show before, but seems to never die, is what it is we call the thing that we do. And there was there's another piece about this, yet another piece about what we name ourselves by Dean Minderman in New Music Box this week. This is kind of the New Music Box discussion hour.
Yeah, for real.
And kind of the talking about the problems with not being able to succinctly describe what we do, and how that can have a pretty detrimental effect on bringing people into the music that we make. What do you guys? Let's start here. What do you guys call when somebody says, "What kind of music do you write?" What do you tell them?
Art music.
Well, what does that mean? That sounds snooty and something like I wouldn't like.
Artsy fartsy.
Actually, when I'm talking, oftentimes when I'm joking with people, I'll say art music. You wouldn't like it. Just what you said, Dave.
A lot of people, I mean, I think one of the terms I hear the most and that is used around the industry, I mean, as far as people who are writing perhaps for chamber and orchestra with traditional instruments that we're used to, is the term serious music.
Serious music.
That is used so much.
Loaded.
I don't feel very serious.
Yeah. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it because like it's just become so like everyone says serious music. Like
Just because
one of those
everybody's
terms.
doing
It's one of those terms like I don't care at this point. Whatever. Call it.
Okay.
Dave, you had mentioned someone mentioned earlier in the episode proto-minimalism, and I knew that was going to come up when we talked about this this topic, because can you just imagine going into a record store, even searching online for the proto-minimalism
For the proto-minimalism
category?
section,
Oh,
there's your Dennis Johnson and your Terry Riley and
Tony O'Connor.
Actually,
Yes.
proto-minimalism would be a lot like
Drones.
those are minimalists. Like proto-minimalism would be, I could say like some Henry Cowell might be proto-minimalism.
this would be quite a serious record store to have.
You gotta get pre-Lamont. You gotta get pre-Lamont to be proto-minimalism.
wow. Okay. I can't think of who that would be before Lamont Young. Does that make me a bad scholar? Well, there are many things that make me a bad scholar, but that could be another among the menagerie of reasons why I'm bad at that.
Yeah, we're busy spending all our time doing podcasts and stuff.
Right, and being entrepreneurs, which distract us from being both scholars and artists.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
So-
to me
Sam,
this
go
is a strange question, because the impetus to categorize your music in that way is a direct outgrowth of the way the pop music industry handles music, and it's easy to see why they do. But if you're writing, the reason I say art music is like because most of the labels, even if they don't absolutely say it, the people who are into that music know what the label means. Like there's like the article talks about 22 different subgenres of electronic dance music.
Right.
Well, those are because people demand those subgenres almost. You know, that's why they exist. But for us,
because people like to describe these are the things that I like and these are the things that I don't like as much.
Yeah,
and
but
they have something in common, and so I'm going to make up a name for all of the music that has those things in common that is mostly describing stuff I like.
right. But the reason I use the electronic dance music thing is because it's purpose-based music in the most real sense. It's music to dance to, right?
Sure.
But if you're not making, and so that's where its classification comes from. But if you're writing art music, its purpose is not to dance to, it's to be art. That's why I say art music. And you're never going to find anything to describe the music that we make that's as satisfying as house, that so succinctly sums it up and lets people know what it probably sounds like. That's the other thing, is you're kind of suggesting what it probably sounds like.
Yeah.
And you just people will say it's sort of house, but it'll slip into something that sounds like drum and bass every once in a while. It's really cool.
Yeah, bit of a dubstep section.
You can't really describe art music most of the time, I would say, that way. You can't use it's music that describes description by metaphor.
Right. And so the metaphor is a problem. I also think context is a big problem. Like when you say that this is electronic dance music, people know what electronic music sounds like. People understand that dance music has certain features that make it danceable, and they can kind of put something together. But so Patrick, you said the term that seems to have the most sway, or the kind of the hegemonic term in your circles, is serious music. I feel like the hegemonic term among people that make the music is new music, right? Mm-hmm. And that is extremely problematic, as Minderman points out here, because it means it's such a generic sounding thing if you don't already know what we're talking about when we say it.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mean new music like, the new Beyonce record, or do you mean...
As an example, type new music into Google and see what you get.
Doesn't get you very far.
That's bad SEO, whoever named us new musicians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's a really big problem. And then when somebody asks, what kind of music do you make? And I don't have a great word for it. And the problem is, if I were to say something that is slightly more descriptive, like contemporary classical music, and putting aside that contradiction momentarily, they will think either contemporary, oh, that means like adult contemporary radio, like rock and alt rock, or classical, that means like Mozart.
Yes.
And it is not really related to either of those in any meaningful way.
No.
And they don't have a context for what it is that I make. They've not only have they not heard of any of the music in the genre, in as much as our music has a genre, not only have they not heard any music in that genre, they don't even know that the genre exists or any adjacent genres exist.
Right.
Yeah, so I kind of like the contemporary classical label just because it does have ties to the classical land, and it is contemporary in that it's now, but like the ties that it has to the classical land is like the tradition of like sitting down with a piece of paper and writing the notes on the page, and then having that be a big part of the process.
Yeah, I think the performance practice is really the main thing that we hang on to, and that even has changed a little.
Yeah.
But that's the closest, and then to say concert music is not as equally undescriptive, or art music, which sounds snooty, even not quite as snooty as serious music, but
concert music. I feel like I know what someone. I'm trying to think of.
Well, you have to think of it like, what does somebody who doesn't already know who Steve Reich is, or has never heard of So Percussion.
Yeah, and that's where I think contemporary classical, just of the terms that I've experienced and reading stuff online and talking with people, that to me gets the closest, and like is the closest with Google and everything too. I mean, there's also like, I know radio uses these kind of terms in a big way, and like there might be a classical station, a jazz station, electronica station, and things like that. And so in those big overarching things, I think classical gets use in that way.
Yeah, but like classical, like I wouldn't, put on, the Roomful of Teeth album and think that I was playing classical music, and I would not expect to hear that on classical radio.
Well, what's the Q2? What do they call it?
I think they call it new music.
New music? Okay.
I don't know.
Go to Q2 right now.
It's going to start playing music, and then you'll hear it on the stream.
No, we can't do that. So,
You know, I've actually had a slight change of heart sitting here.
Okay.
I don't really use.
I'm glad we had this conversation.
Yeah, I don't use this term when I'm talking to academic people because it's much more descriptive in a specific way that they'll think they'll take it in a very specific way. Although I think it does apply to me sometimes, is experimental music. I think probably your average civilian would get more of a real idea of what your music might be like by that term, because even in the non-academically trained and not derivative of Mozart in any way kind of music that is really weird, you know, guys who have noise bands that practice in their garage and this kind of thing, that would be under experimental music. So at the very least, it would get across the idea that it's something that is designed to be an absolute listening experience. You know, it's not to dance to, it's not to play at a wedding, it is an intense listening experience.
Yeah, Sam, I'm totally with you on that. Like in the different pop lands and classical land, like trying new things, and even like in pop acts when they do the notation or do different kind of like John Zorni experimental cells and stuff. That experimental term, I think, definitely holds a lot of sway.
Yeah, well, I typed in experimental music into Google and then looked at the video results, and it's a mix of lots of Japanese electronic stuff, but there's also, like, you know, composer music that I don't know who the composers are, but, you know, it's a chamber group of some kind. There's a sewing machine orchestra, which sounds pretty interesting.
Right.
So I think maybe that might be, we solved it. Hey.
Experimental. Easy.
Experimental? I think
what's
experimental is maybe experimental classical? That's a really awkward phrase.
How's this? Entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurial classical.
So Anthony in the Q&A app, and if you're watching this live, or if you want to watch live, there's a Q&A thing that you can do to pop questions at us while we're doing the show live. Live.soundnotion.tv to get that link each week. And Anthony's says that he's started using new classical. And that's gotten the best reactions from people so far. They don't look confused, they look interested and intrigued. What do you guys think of new classical?
I'd use that too, for sure.
That's pretty good.
It's good. I like it. I was on earlier this year. I was on a podcast called Systematic on the 5x5 podcast network, and I had to address this issue. I had this issue, and it's not a music podcast. It's just this guy talks to people, and they talk about what you do and how you do it. And I had that problem of that cocktail party problem of, well, what do you do? I write music. Well, what kind of music do you write? And this guy's got a background in metal, and he suggested the name new metal for what for the music that I made.
And that's new, N-E-W, and then N-U metal, right?
It could be.
I think
it could be.
Yeah, I think that's the thing.
New metal. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Would you describe you guys have heard my music. Would you describe me as a new metal composer?
Absolutely.
You might have to throw the acoustic term in there too, though.
Yes.
New acoustic metal.
New acoustic metal.
Yeah.
That's what we should. We need a contest of like the weirdest, like most roundabout descriptions of the kinds of music that we make. I think new acoustic new metal could be, or new acoustic new metal could be on the list.
Right. Exactly.
I like it. I think we're solving problems here today, gentlemen.
Yeah. The world's questions.
We should point out that we talked to Todd LaRue and a couple of other composers a few months ago who were finalists for the American Composers Forum National Composition Contest. Todd LaRue was announced this week won that contest, and so his music will be part of So Percussion's tour going forward. He was commissioned to write a new work for them. That work is called Flagging Entertainment of Ultradian Rhythms and the Consequences Thereof, which sounds excellent.
Oh, that's cool. Ultradian, of course, referring to the 24 circadian cycle of human beings.
Of course.
Thanks, Wikipedia.
What?
What, you guys didn't know that word? Yeah.
Ultradian escaped me.
I am offended that you would suggest that I look that word up.
On Wikipedia or WebMD or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
About.com.
Hey, Patrick, tell us about this new project. What was it? The thing to get more new American music.
Hey, Sam. Okay.
The American Music Project, I believe,
Yeah.
is what you're talking about.
Which has been so it's this new project started by Lawrence Johnson, who's a critic who you've probably, if you watch this podcast, have read some reviews on the South Florida Classical Review, the Chicago Classical Review, New York Classical Review, Boston Classical Review. There are several different iterations of the Classical Review with reviewers in different cities.
He's a Chicago-based guy.
And he's a Chicago-based guy. And so Lawrence has decided there isn't enough American music, or at least American music should be represented more in our concert halls and at concerts everywhere. So he has began the American Music Project, which is a nonprofit that hopes to spotlight more American music and commission new works. I'm not quite sure where I haven't read enough to see like exactly where all the money is coming from, and if it's just a grant machine, or if there are actual like donors to this initiative. But I'm for it.
Looking at their site, it looks like they've got concert plans and commissioning plans, and they're interested not just in commissioning new stuff, but making sure that older American music is represented in concert halls. So it's very cool, and we hope to see more from them in the near future.
They're going to offer grants to ensembles and presenters too, not just commissions.
Yes,
So
which is very cool.
yeah,
So bring out your Roger Sessions.
Yeah,
that's right.
I would go to some Roger Sessions
No
concerts.
kidding.
Me too.
I don't know if I've ever actually heard Sessions performed live. I've only heard recorded.
Absolutely not.
This is the problem.
Probably because it's really stinking hard to play.
Yes.
We should also one more new music box related plug before we wrap up our section that I will call New Music Box is wonderful. Our friend Ellen McSweeney that we mentioned briefly in the entrepreneurial artist discussion earlier. We talked to her about her Parlor Tapes project earlier this year, or I guess that was last year. It's been a long time, man. And she is going to be starting a new column on New Music Box that is an advice column. So, and I think she got a lot of attention for this kind of thing after the discussion that she started about the Chicago Beethoven Festival and
Yes.
and their problems paying musicians. And one of the things that came up was the fact that some people felt that it was taboo to talk about how much you were getting paid, and other people thought that that was silly. And so she is kind of putting together this new column as a way to address some of those issues. And if people have a question that they're afraid to ask in the open, that this is going to be a supportive forum and we can give direct feedback to anonymous questions. And I think it's a great idea, and I look forward to seeing not only the sorts of questions that people ask, but Ellen's response to them, and as always, lively comment threads at New Music Box. So, do you guys have any questions that we would hope to see come up?
What would you call the kind of music we make? I think that should be the first thing we ask her.
Yeah.
And we should also ask her,
Are you an entrepreneur?
Can an artist be an entrepreneur? Those two questions.
One thing that I
That
love,
would be kind of funny, actually. I might do that.
I like this article on New Music Box. The picture suggests that you might be able to send them a letter through snail mail by writing.
Could I
Yeah.
seal
Dearest
it with
friend,
the wax thing on my ring?
Yeah, exactly. And then the address that you do is newmusic.org or newmusicbox.org, and then the internet is the address. It's good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, I like it. I didn't notice that, Nate.
Yeah, I hope that works. So send all your mail to the internet.
Right.
It'll find its way to her. I'm
And then
sure.
Sam, you get this
Yes,
last
sir?
one? You get this last one?
Oh, yes. Peter Sculthorpe, the absolutely leading Australian composer. If you've never heard of him, you're probably not alone. And I have to admit that I took the panel by surprise mentioning that he had passed away. I knew of his music only because I had done some score cleanup in preparation for the Verdier Trio at Michigan State while I was there, and he had written a piece for them.
And we've talked before about how ignorant it is easy to be about music in other cultures, in other countries.
Yes. In Australia, I mean, it's on the bottom side of the planet and way on the other side. I mean,
It's very difficult to hear them from way down there. You guys need to play a little louder.
Down? You mean up? What?
But anyway, he was active as a composer for a very long time. Passed away August 8th at the age of 85. So led a full life. Lots of string quartets, orchestral pieces, solo violin pieces. He's just he was a real composer. Really did it, made his living that way. And he's like, in the same way, if you're a music person in the U.S., you know who Steve Reich is. If you're a music person in Australia, you know who Peter Sculthorpe was. So the music world says goodbye to him this week.
And that's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to those who were joining us live and asking questions in chat. That was wonderful to have that interaction. If you would like to do that, we stream this show out from live.soundnotion.tv on Sunday mornings around 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and we would love for you to join us for that. I think you might need to click through to the YouTube page to ask questions. I'm not sure, though. So you should do that, and we will hang out and answer your questions if you have any questions. In fact, maybe if you have questions that aren't necessarily related to what's going on in the topics, you can hang around after we wrap the show here. And if you have any other questions about what we do around here or whatever, we'll answer those too. So you can find that and the show notes for this show, links to all the stories that we talked about, and you can comment if you're listening or watching after the fact at soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also connect with us on various other social media machines. We're on Twitter as @SoundNotion. I'm @Dave McDough. Nate is @AnateTree. Patrick is @Vox Shibuya. And Sam is @HouseGoy. So you can find that. And if you can't spell any of those things, we have links to those on the site as well. We're also at facebook.com/SoundNotion. And we are on, you can subscribe to us on all kinds of things, so be sure to do those as well. If you'd like to support the show, you can leave us a review in the whatever store that you found us in. That helps us out a lot to leave us a nice positive review in iTunes or wherever. You can support us also by using the Amazon affiliate link on our site. Buy whatever you're normally buying on Amazon, just find it through our site, and we'll get a little commission for that. Doesn't cost you anything, doesn't look any different to you. And, of course, as always, our introduction music is by Patrick Gullo. Thank you for being here this week. Thank you for being here this week, and we'll see you back next week.
Entrepreneurial.